Hello, hello, and welcome back to Death and Taxes, your podcast from the ATA, from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am one half of your hosting duo, John Humphreys, and as always, I am joined by Gene Tunny. Gene, how you doing?
I'm going well, John. I'm still getting over the shock, though, of your new look. Could you tell us the story about that, please?
Well, as you said just before coming on air, clearly I'm just getting prepared for my run for new federal Liberal leader in anticipation of a spot opening up soon. But no, the real story is somewhat more mundane. I have enlisted in the Australian Army Reserves, so went in to do my little enlistment ceremony. Thought I'd look the part. You're not allowed to have a beard when parading in the Australian Army. Interestingly, I didn't know this, but you can in the Navy and the Air Force. But the Army, as yet, doesn't allow a beard. Allows a mustache, but the Army would allow me to have a mustache. My wife wouldn't. So that's
so. This is maybe if you're fighting at close quarters, they don't want the beard that people can grab onto. I don't know. I've got no idea.
No, I think the nominal reason is to ensure that gas masks fit well.
That makes sense.
Which interestingly, I don't know if you know this story. This is a bit of a weird segue, first thing off the bat. But in World War I, the gas masks fit quite snugly through here. And so it was the German gas masks anyway. So it was quite a common thing for the Germans to shave the outsides of their mustache off so that the gas mask could fit properly. And that's where this little, what we now call the Hitler mo, or the Charlie Chaplin mustache, came from. By Hitler sporting that mustache long after World War I, what he was basically doing is signaling to the public that I fought in World War I. You know, I was out in the trenches in World War I fighting for my country. And so he kind of kept that fighter's mustache. And now we just think of it as the Hitler mustache, of course. But no mustache for me. I've avoided that fate. So you're going to come and join me in the Army Reserves, Gene?
Well, I'll think about it. It's interesting. I think it's good. Service to the country. And I don't think anyone would want to be a Liberal Party leader.
It's probably safer to head off to war.
So. Yeah, but we should get into it, shouldn't we?
Yes. All right. So if you're but the usual housekeeping, of course, this is live. We take your questions, comments, and criticisms. So feel free to write them in as we go. If they're particularly interesting, we may address them as we go. Otherwise, we're more likely to leave them to the end and see if there's anything at the end, if we have time to get to them. So this is being simulcast on YouTube, on X, and on Facebook. On YouTube and Facebook, it goes to the Australian Taxpayers Alliance page. So please go around, have a look for those. If you're not on them now, please go and find us on YouTube and Facebook. Give us a like, give us a follow, give it a share. And on X, this goes out on my personal page on John Humphreys through X. So if you're there, give me a like, give me a follow, give it a share there as well. If we share it, gets it around the algorithm, gets the algorithm to understand that this is what people should see. So that would help us a lot if you can do that. So with that all said and out of the way, we're going to come back today to address what we were talking about last week, which has been the big political topic of the last couple of weeks, which has been these hate laws. Now, we had a big discussion on that last week. Now the issue has kind of wrapped up. And so it's not just the hate laws now, it's also the political fallout from the hate laws. So we're going to look into that. We are going to, time permitting, have also a look at the migration numbers coming into this country, and a bit of a discussion about, because there's various different types of migration numbers. And I think there can be some confusion about which ones are which ones you should target. And it's not even clear which ones you should be targeting. It kind of depends on what your opinion is of migration. So we'll unpack migration a little bit in the second half of this episode. But before we do that, as usual, we will start off with Gene's Roundup, where Gene gives us a quick summary of the economic news of the week so that you don't have to pay attention, because you can all free ride off Gene's wisdom and benevolence. All right, over to you, Gene.
Very good. Thanks, John. And I'll just whip through this quickly because we've got a lot of meaty subjects to talk about. And the big news today was the surprise more significant reduction in, or or a significant reduction in unemployment that was unexpected from 4.3% to 4.1%. And that's related to rather, reasonably strong employment growth, or there was a pickup in employment of 65,000 in November. And, this is contrary to what the RBA is expecting. It's suggesting that the economy is hotter than they would have thought it had been at this stage, given that they were starting to, cut interest rates, and that they had inflation under control. The other week about how inflation may not be under control. So all of this is making the prospect of a rate rise in the first week of February much more likely. The market's pricing it a bit around 50% or so. So, very possible. And people are saying it'll be a coin flip. Now, this employment, it's we're seeing that we had a bit of a pickup in participation as well. Participation is still higher than pre-pandemic, and I think this relates to the topic we're going to talk about a bit later, John, with migration. I mean, partly what we've got is we've got this changing composition of the workforce. We've had this big influx of overseas students, and they're more likely to work. I mean, in fact, arguably one of the drivers of the migration to Australia, the student visas, is the fact that it gives them work rights in Australia. So we've still got high participation. It's been, it's come off a little bit, but still higher than pre-pandemic. And one other aspect, thing I looked at, so whenever we look at labour force data, we want to check, how is it full-time, is it part-time? And I mean, full-time jobs are growing too. And in fact, in proportional terms, since 2020, they've grown more than part-time. And, that's what that chart's showing there, the blue versus the pink. And that's, possibly related to a lot of these NDIS and healthcare and social assistance jobs. So a lot of them are government funded, but it's, we are getting significant growth in full-time jobs. Economy looks like it's much hotter than previously thought by the RBA, raising the prospect of a rate rise in February. The other thing,
so two questions for you before you change topics too quickly. Yeah. Two questions for you on that one, Gene. Quite different questions. One is you say you reckon the market's pricing in a 50-50 chance of a rate increase. What would you do? Yeah. What do you think is the right move for them? I'll throw you in the deep end.
I think they should increase the cash rate. Yep, they should increase rates. I think they didn't increase. Okay, so they didn't increase early enough. They delayed increasing relative to the Federal Reserve in the US, and I think definitely compared with Reserve Bank in New Zealand. And I think
you're talking about a few years ago, right? When they
So they were too slow, and they didn't increase the rates as much as other central banks. And I think they were too quick to start cutting. So, well, in hindsight, it looks like that's the case. So I think they need to readjust. So they'll present this like it's going to be embarrassing for them, right? Because this would be one of the shortest monetary easing cycles in history, really. I mean, so it's totally embarrassing for them. So they'll have to come up with some language about, this is just a readjustment or a recalibration or something. They'll have to be pretty tricky with how they word this. But I think they really have to, given the data we're seeing on inflation and jobs and unemployment. I mean, what do you think, John?
I half agree with that. I mean, I don't think they should have cut as much as they did on this cycle. So to that degree, I guess if getting them to put rates back up is just taking them back to where I say they should have been already. Although I got to say, I don't think unemployment data is the correct data to use to justify a rate increase. I mean, I am quite the strict monetarist with these things. It's quite possible to have a booming employment sector and a booming economy without inflation if it's caused by productivity increases. Yeah. We don't know what this is being caused by yet. To me, it only matters what the inflation is doing. and not just the CPI. You've got to make a judgment about what the total inflation is doing, including, if you think CPI is a good measure of that. So I'm not just a CPI hawk, but yes, I'm just an inflation hawk. So good unemployment numbers are a good thing to see. They're only a concern if they are a part of an inflationary cycle, and the unemployment numbers on their own don't tell me that. So I'll be waiting to see the next set of inflation numbers. So I wouldn't have brought rates down to here, but having got the rates down to here, I wouldn't increase them on the basis of these numbers either. I'm not sure they will increase them, because I think they will be too concerned about not knowing how to explain themselves.
It depends.
Pausing for another month. There's an instinct to pause often, just and wait to see what the next piece of data is.
Yeah, well, we get the December inflation CPI next week, and so that'll give us another data point. And I think it's December. It's either November or December. We're on monthly CPI now. So yeah, that will be a big driver of their decision. Look, I mean, it's a hard one for them, because sure, you might think, oh, well, we'll wait for some more data, but then don't you just stoke the inflation? Don't you risk it being worse? Don't you risk it accelerating, and meaning that later on you have to increase rates even more? So
that's why I wouldn't have cut them in the first place. But you make a good case. I just think I think it is a common Keynesian fallacy, or a Phillips curve, dogmatic Phillips curve mentality that says, all right, employment's going well, that means inflation must be spiking because of that. I don't take employment to be an indicator of inflation. I take employment to be an indicator of employment, and inflation to be an indicator of inflation. Employment is driven by labor laws and productivity. Inflation is driven by monetary policy and, to some degree, fiscal policy. So they're caused by different things. They don't have to go together. They can sometimes, but that's my only point. But you make a good point as well. I think that's we might end up in the same point, given I don't think they should have cut this far and you think they should increase. So we end up similar. But so my second question on this quickly is, these unemployment numbers looking good, what do you think is causing that? And I guess that goes to the point of, do you think this is illusionary employment growth caused by monetary expansion? Is it an overheating economy? Or is this, are we actually seeing some benefit from a productivity bump?
Sorry, are we seeing a benefit from a productivity bump?
Yes. I mean, what's causing these good numbers, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's various things. I think certainly the economy is hotter than the RBA would like. So, and demand is contributing to inflation. I think that is the case. It's government spending. It's these large deficits. I mean, did you see Chris Richardson's piece in the AFR today, where he's talking about the huge forecasting errors in the budget driven by NDIS? I mean, the government is just pumping huge amounts of money into social welfare sector. And then also we've got all of the lending. We've got the asset price appreciation, house price appreciation. There's going to be capital gains from that. People will be, baby boomers and Gen Xers, and they're using that to boost their consumption spending. So I think it's a whole bunch of things, John, that's adding to this demand.
Yeah, no, to my mind, the critical question is, obviously people are spending more, but are they spending more because they have more money, because they've actually produced more? Is this a supply side increase in productivity, which is causing wages to actually go up, and when the wages go up, the productivity go up, allow more people to be employed? Is that's what's going on? That's just, in my opinion, that's purely good. If an economy is quote unquote overheating for that reason, I don't call that overheating. I want more of that. You just always crank that up. There's no downside to just more employment and more wages coming from the fact that we are more productive. And that doesn't create, in my opinion, inflation. Or is this the $1 million question, or is this being caused by the fact that the government is just pumping money into the NDIS, into the public service, which is flooding people with money, which is going to create an illusionary employment benefit, which is going to be unwound once inflation comes and bites us all? We don't know yet. We often don't know until hindsight, which is the tricky part. Now, I've been very critical of this government and the previous government on the productivity front for a long time, as have you. We've discussed it many times on this show. And I think policy settings haven't been set in such a way as to boost productivity. You know, we've talked many times about the need for lower taxes, less regulation, cheaper energy to allow people to go out and invest more and innovate more. And that's the driver of productivity in a nutshell. I've got one little caveat on this now. Part of me wonders, and I was saying this a couple of years ago, these stage 3 tax cuts, when they finally were introduced, were, in my opinion, the only piece of meaningful microeconomic reform in this country for 20 years. When they came in, I think it was inevitable that 6 to 12 to 18 months afterwards, we would see a little productivity benefit from that. I wonder if that's what we're experiencing now. I mean, it's a bit unfair that the Labor government gets to experience it, given that it was very much a Liberal Party tax cut proposal. But I wonder if we are seeing a little productivity bump from that stage 3 tax cuts working its way through the system, in which case these are just good numbers. This wouldn't be overheating. This would be a happy payoff, right? The economic benefit, the economic payoff from the tax cuts, which I think is potentially part of the explanation for these numbers.
It could be. I mean, I'd lean more toward the demand side factors, the government spending, the credit growth that we're seeing. But look, that's a valid hypothesis you've got. Maybe we should unpack that a bit more in a future episode and see if we can find any indicators that would suggest that could be occurring.
Well, the indicators will be the inflation over the next 12 months. So in 12 months, we'll know who was right, but it'll be too late by then.
It will be.
Let's unpack that next time. So what do you have next?
Just before we get on to your topics, I thought it's fascinating with the whole S&P. I mean, I don't know if you saw Trump at Davos, where he pulled back some of the belligerent rhetoric around Greenland, and because the day before the S&P 500 fell 2%, and so Trump actually mentioned that in the speech. It looks like he's very much driven by what happens on Wall Street. I mean, probably because he's talking to his friends on, in hedge funds or investment banks, and they're saying, "Oh, look, maybe you should rethink this." And so he basically walked back his belligerent comments and said, "Oh, look, I was never really going to invade, but I am going to keep up the pressure." So there was a bit of a bounce back. I mean, it hasn't come back to where it was the day before, but there's a bit of a bounce back, and I think markets are less. Yeah, they're not freaking out as much as they potentially could have, because he's walked that back, which is good. A point Trump made was that markets are still, high relative to where they have been. I mean, over the longer run. So that's just a chart over this year. But if you look at the US share market, since the pandemic, I mean, it's just rocketed up, right? And it's at very high valuation ratios. So if you look at a fairly traditional measure of whether a stock market is overvalued or not, or how the prices to earnings, this is a cyclically adjusted price earnings ratio that Bob Schiller developed. I mean, it's getting up very high. It's not on that data set I'm presenting there. It's not quite at where it was at the .com bubble, but I mean, we're talking about 40. A PE ratio of 40. So price to earnings ratio of 40 is essentially meaning you're getting a real return on your money or your earnings is essentially 2.5% of the price, right? So that's a very low yield, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. It would suggest that the market is overvalued, unless there really is something to this story about AI leading to huge profitability in the future. I mean, who knows? Maybe this time is different, but history suggests it generally isn't. So my feeling is that the market in the US, I mean, none of this is investment advice, of course, but if you look at those type of metrics, it is very overvalued at the moment in the States.
I guess the question there is just for people who have savings, where to put their money. And if you don't think there's many safe places to put it, then you don't have many other options than American bonds, but they've got very crappy returns, and then the American stock market. So this is a question of, I guess, the implicit part of what you're saying there is this just hidden future inflation? Is this just money in the capital markets because there's just too much money sloshing around, and it's not being spent yet because it's funneling into assets, creating a bubble in those asset prices and waiting to burst out from those asset prices in some dramatic fashion. But I guess, again, like our last discussion, we'll know much better in 12 months' time. This is the infuriating part of watching economics in real time. But yes, that is a worrying PE ratio. That's
exactly.
And I guess some people may say it's the AI indicating that there's great future earnings, right? So there's to unpack that a little bit. That argument says that the price of shares is so high, even though the earnings from those shares isn't very high. The price is high because people are expecting very high future earnings because something is about to boom, right? So that's the other potential explanation. That's the positive. That's the white pill, glass half full explanation for this. And the glass half empty is that people are just putting money in here because they've got nowhere else to put it, and that may not be sustainable long term.
Yeah, they're putting it in here, and then also gold. I mean, gold's, that's almost, it was up at 4,800 the other day when people were starting to get very concerned about Greenland, I think. And we're seeing a lot of potential asset price bubbles here. But we'll keep an eye on this over coming weeks, John. That's all for my roundup for the time being. So unless you've got any questions or additional thoughts, we should probably move on.
Yeah, all good. All right. So now that everyone feels fully caught up with the economic world for the last week, let's dive into the Australian political world for the last week, which has been dominated by this discussion about the hate laws. So we discussed this in our podcast last Thursday, where we were talking about what is likely to be coming. And by then, I think we'd already knew that the government was backing down. Or did we know that by then? I'm not sure if we knew that by then.
We didn't.
Pressure. No, we didn't. Okay. So look, we banged the drum quite hard on that last week through X, through emails, through our podcast, through the website, and encouraging everyone to contact your politicians because, look, each one email to the politician seems kind of pointless. But they can add up. There are the people inside politics. They're very worried about the zeitgeist of the voters because they need to get reelected. And if they suddenly get bombarded with what seems like real people, it can make a difference at the margins. I don't want to overplay it. I don't want to say, Gene, you and I single-handedly have stopped these laws, but every little bit helps. So I just want to say, by the way, if you're listening in, if you heeded that advice from not just ourselves, but others last week to get in touch with someone, get in touch with a politician, wave the flag, make other people aware, like and boost those social media posts. If you were a part of doing that last week, thank you. It did make a bit of a difference. Now, I don't want to overstate it. Some people just declared victory. This is a case of 1 step forward, 2 steps backwards. The alternative was going to be 3 steps backwards, right? So this is still there's something to be happy about with the sort of the political noise that we were able to make. The government did step away from their explicit anti-speech laws. So from actually criminalizing hate speech. So, hate speech is already an issue in Australia, but as I mentioned last week, it's done under 18C, where you can get sued and you have to do an apology or pay some money. This was going to make it so that if no one complained and no one was offended, a cop could show up to your house, charge you with a criminal charge and potentially put you in jail for 5 years for saying the wrong things. So that was, in my opinion, one of the most egregious direct assaults on freedom of speech that Australia has ever seen. And thankfully, at the beginning, when this was first announced, there was, I think, a very real chance this was going to go through, right? I mean, it's sometimes you see things in hindsight, how they play out, and you think, oh, it was always going to go that way. This was in the balance for a few days. And I think critically, what happened is there was enough furor from you, the people listening at home, the people who got involved, who got angry, who told people, who wrote a letter, as long as, polite works better, by the way. What that eventually did is it forced first One Nation to come out loudly, because the One Nation was quiet for a few days. But I think the pressure, and then One Nation came out, and then once One Nation did that, we could put pressure on the coalition. And then once the coalition felt that pressure, this furor on social media, the online right wing and One Nation, then of course worried about One Nation rising in the polls, the coalition then came out against the hate speech laws as well. And then we got a bit lucky in that the Greens came out against it and Labor had to just shelve it, right? They had to put it away. They didn't have the numbers. And, once Liberals were against it, that looks like, it looks like it was an inevitable thing that Labor would put it away. But I think that was in the balance, right? It was in the balance what the Liberals were going to do. And the pressure from One Nation and you people at home contributed to that. So there you go. That's some political power in action. Unfortunately, Labor did then pass all the rest of the bill. Sorry, Gene, were you going to say?
I was just going to say, John, that I think the Libs were torn because they were strongly against, as they should have been, anti-Semitism, and they were heeding the calls from, I think one of the Jewish groups was supportive of the original laws, weren't they? And so I think
the two biggest
Susan
Jewish groups was supportive. Yeah.
I think Susan Lee was in a difficult position because she wanted to signal her support and she wanted to signal her abhorrence of she wanted to signal she was against anti-Semitism, and she was in a very difficult position, and she was pushing for the government to do something. It was a really difficult.
That's why at the time I thought it was a very real possibility the Liberals were just going to fully back whatever Labor said. I think that was a very real risk, and it would have happened but for the pressure from the sort of people who are listening to this now. And thankfully, One Nation came in because it needed the pressure from One Nation. It made the coalition worry about losing more support to One Nation on that issue. But I think, One Nation also didn't come out for a few days. And I think we helped ensure that One Nation came out strongly against it with the pressure from the people who are writing letters, contacting your politicians and signal boosting on social media. So, the Liberals kind of tied themselves in a bit of a circle by effectively going into this saying, you must do something, you must do everything, you must do anything. As long as you say we're doing this to combat anti-Semitism, do everything in the world, right? So they kind of tied themselves into a bit of a quandary there, because when Labor comes out and proposes something quite egregious in their anti-speech laws, the Liberals then have built up such a rhetoric of we will do anything on the altar of this political campaign, because they're trying to wedge Labor, right? They're trying to accuse Labor of being anti-Semitic by trying to really ramp up how anti-Semitic the Liberals are. And so, they were in a difficult situation. We managed to, not just you and me, everyone listening, we managed to get them to back down and defeat that part of the law. So that, we can be happy about that, but let's move on to what we can't be as happy about, which is the rest of the laws, which didn't need to pass, right? So, well, firstly, what Labor did is they split their bill into three, into two that you saw. They took one part of it, which was the explicit anti-speech laws, and they didn't put it forward. So we beat that part. Then they put the gun laws forward, and they put that on its own because they knew that the Greens would always support their anti-gun laws. And the Greens did support the anti-gun laws, and unfortunately, those are now the laws of the land. But then there was the third part of this, which was the anti-association laws and the hate crime laws. And they were put forward with Labor hoping that they could pressure the Liberals into supporting those elements, because the Greens weren't going to. So it rested on the Liberals. And that's why this campaign had to keep going over the weekend. And then, unfortunately, the Liberals did end up siding with Labor. And so they did pass the rest of these hate laws. So just unpacking here what that really means. There's three parts, really, that did pass with Liberal support. One we discussed last week, which was quite a worrying and dangerous law, in my opinion, which is the fact that the government, and this is not the whole of government or Parliament, it's just two ministers, the Home Affairs Minister and the Attorney General, and then in combination with one bureaucrat, the head of ASIO, can just designate a group a hate group and immediately ban it. Right. So that is quite a lot of power to be able to ban a group as long as you have a good cover story about how they have hate in their hearts. It's very hard to see inside people's hearts. You can accuse them of whatever you want to accuse them of if they are unpopular. So this gave the government a lot of dangerous power, in my opinion. And we discussed last week which I think we should discuss more in a moment, they could use that to ban political parties.
Yes.
Which is and then we're saying, hopefully they won't, probably they won't. We shouldn't be in a position where we're saying hopefully and probably in a country like Australia, right? This shouldn't be on the cards. It shouldn't be an option. And just quickly, the other two things, one part that hasn't been discussed much because a lot of people agree with, these laws gave the government more power to be able to kick people out of the country. Now, realistically, that's got a lot of public support. The government already had a lot of power to do that. I mean, we just saw them recently kick out that neo-Nazi fella back to South Africa. So they did that very quickly with pre-existing laws, right? So they already had fairly good laws, but anyway, they wanted to strengthen them. Everyone seemed to support that. That's not the part that people are worried. The other little part of this, the other relevant part of this law worth mentioning is they did strengthen hate crime laws. So hate crime laws, you commit a crime, and then if while committing the crime, you have a certain set of thoughts in your head, then the crime is worse, right? It's now a hate crime and there's extra penalties. It is quite literally, people hate it when I say this, but it is quite literally a thought crime, right? So if you commit a crime, let's say you do a robbery and you're going to get 5 years, but if you do a robbery and at the same time you're having bad thoughts, you get 7 years. So you've got 5 years for the robbery and 2 years punishment, literally for thoughts, right? It's for what your opinion is of the person you're attacking. It's what you think about them as you're robbing them or whatever the crime is. So that I think is also a bit worrying that they've strengthened and unified the definitions about hate crime, and they're quite broad categories, broad definitions they've got of hate crime. So all of those went through, and especially this hate crime part, and well, I should say the hate crime part, and especially the anti-association laws, these hate group laws, provoked a lot of angst from the same people who are worried about the anti-speech laws. And this has now created, those laws are now in bed, they're in place, they're bedded down. Now we've got the political fallout. Because of course, and you would have seen this, Jean, when there was this original furor, when One Nation came out against the hate laws, then we started seeing backbenchers, liberal backbenchers come out. And, God bless them, this was really important part of this process. Alex Antic came out straight away, said the right thing, and ultimately did the right thing. Matt Canavan came out early, said the right thing, and ultimately did the right thing. Andrew Hastie came out early, said the right thing, then spun on a dime and voted for the hate laws. And this has created quite a bit of consternation. I mean, we saw today, it seems that Hastie is spiraling a bit on his social media, sort of fighting back against people who are disappointed in him, because a lot of people were very disappointed in this.
Yeah.
Right. He said, "Oh, I will vote against this. This is an attack on freedom." It's still an attack on freedom. These anti-association laws and these hate crime laws are still an attack on freedom. But he's decided that, no, this is important enough for him to support. And most of the Liberals did. All of the Liberals, except for the aforementioned Senator Alex Antic, who, once again, is one of the stars of politics. If you're not following Alex Antic, I suggest you do. He doesn't have a ministry, means he's not on the front bench, doesn't have a portfolio. That gives him the freedom to speak his mind and vote his conscience. And he is often the lone Liberal pushing back against some piece of insanity. He was the lone Liberal who voted against the last round of hate laws that went through Parliament last year. So if you're not following Alex Antic yet, I suggest you do. But he was the lone Liberal. The Liberals otherwise backed this in. And One Nation came out and they stuck to their guns. And, kudos to them. Kudos to One Nation, stuck to their guns and said, no, we're not voting for any of this. And that then created a fascinating dilemma for the National Party. Of course, the National Party is in coalition with the Liberal Party. Now, the National Party ministers are nominally bound by shadow cabinet solidarity, which is to say, once a decision is made by the Susan Ley, or Sussan Ley, two S's, you've got to say Sussan, the Sussan Ley opposition, then all ministers are bound to vote for whatever Sussan says. The National Party was caught with a lot of their constituents, a lot of their voters, a lot of their supporters agree with One Nation, agree with you and us, dear viewer, the people who did this pushback, the people who wrote thousands and thousands of emails, who submitted thousands of submissions to the inquiry, which the government never read. mind you. So the supporters of the National Party agree with us, but they're in coalition with the Liberals. And so this created a difficult situation. And at the last minute, the Canavan faction seemed to have won that internal debate in the National Party. And the National Party, to their credit, voted no on these laws. So that is, again, I put that down a lot to the pressure that was built up by the online activists, the people writing the emails, and of course, One Nation, crucially One Nation, credit to them. And that did succeed in getting the Nats to do the right thing. Unfortunately, it didn't change the law, because once Liberal and Labor are in coalition with each other to pass a law, the rest of Parliament can't stop them. And that's actually what happened, by the way. It was the vote in the Senate. It was Liberal and Labor voting yes, and pretty much everyone else voting no. A broad coalition of the David Pococks and the Greens and Tammy Tyrrell and Ralph Babette and One Nation and the National Party and, again, Alex Antic. So Liberal and Labor coalition is got a majority in the Senate. So they were able to pass it through, but to their credit, the Nats pushed back. But the political drama, the political fallout, sort of the scuttlebutt and the gossip that comes out of this is, of course, they're in coalition. How can that sustain? And as it turns out, it can't. So because some of the Nats voted against this hate legislation, this terrible hate legislation, which the Liberals should have voted against, because some of the Nats voted against it, they broke shadow cabinet solidarity. So by convention, they should tender their resignations. And by convention, the leader of the opposition, Susan Ley, would accept their resignations and replace them with someone else. The National Party, when they tendered their resignations, sent another letter saying, look, we're tendering our resignations as we should. We really hope you will reject our resignations and allow us to stay on. We did what we think is right. You passed your laws anyway. Yeah. If you accept our resignations, if you in fact fire us, we all walk. The whole party walks.
Yeah.
So Susan Ley was aware of that. She decided to let those three ministers go, let the National Party ministers go, and all the rest of the national ministers walked out of shadow cabinet. So effectively, the coalition is over. The Liberals and Nationals are going their own way as things currently stand. So this is a story that is still evolving and being unpacked. We don't know who's going to step into these shadow ministries. We don't yet know which of these parties are going to sustain or which of these parties are going to have the same leaders in a week. I mean, you listening at home, if you get a short haircut and shave your beard, you may be Liberal leader by the end of next week. Of course, this is made more difficult by the fact there is now a lot of mumbling about replacing Susan Ley as leader of the Liberals. But replace her with who? With Andrew Hastie? He's just the guy that we just discussed, who said he was going to oppose this and then supported it. So if this issue is what's triggered a split in the coalition and triggered a rethink in the Liberal Party, that's not necessarily going to bring people back to the Liberal Party, right? That's not going to necessarily mend the bridges. So, look, I suspect we're going to see Angus Taylor as the leader of the Liberals in a couple of weeks' time. But we will see. I mean, the options are Angus Taylor, Andrew Hastie, Ted O'Brien, and Tim Wilson. But we will see. That's going to be a lot of discussion about that in the coming weeks, and you'll have your chance to have your say. But in the meantime, the Nats are going to the crossbench, and the Nats have, I believe, 14 members in the lower house and 4 members in the Senate, and they're now going to be sitting as the biggest minor party, as the biggest crossbench party in the country. And there's been a lot of discussion now that the National Party should go into coalition with One Nation and form a new force. Now, I understand the sentiment behind that, although I don't think it's realistic, right? So you normally form a coalition in a way where you can like trade off things, but One Nation is explicitly going after the National Party seats. So I'm not really sure what they're going to have to negotiate in coalition agreements.
And they couldn't win, could they? Because between them, they wouldn't have enough of the two-party preferred. They wouldn't be able to get enough seats. So I can't say, I don't think.
Well, they may get the two-party preferred, but I'm not sure they'll get the seats because I suspect their vote is all going to be clustered in the rural and regional areas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So One Nation would be eating into a lot of National Party support and a lot of Labor support in seats that will probably still be won by Labor. So look, the two-party preferred, if going on News Poll, right? So News Poll is been the most friendly to One Nation, but if we assume that that's close to the truth, that had One Nation on 22% and the Liberal Nationals on 21%. But note, that's the Liberals plus the Nationals. So you take the Nationals out of there, and it would be probably the Liberals on 18 and the Nationals are on 3, or the Liberals on 19, Nationals are on 2. And if you put the Nationals in with One Nation, then that puts One Nation up to 25. Now, realistically, nearly all of these polls still show that, even though the really interesting part of the polls is that One Nation is overtaking the Liberals as the second political party in the country, the other thing all of these polls still show is that Labor still ultimately wins the election.
Yeah.
Right. So it's still a very difficult path for One Nation to form a government at the next election. Right. That's still a difficult path, although the election is 2 years away. So who knows? But I mean, if they're on 45, 46% of the two-party preferred, then that they'll probably lose. But that puts them within reach, right? I mean, that starts to become a viable thing. We have to start thinking. And the thing about One Nation is they'll pick up a lot of National Party seats. They'll also pick up non-metropolitan Labor seats. Like historically, they do quite well in non-metropolitan Labor seats. There's a certain Labor type of voter who can't bring themselves to vote for a party they associate with inner city toffs like Malcolm Turnbull. But they're sort of angry about immigration. They're not interested in woke. They're union boys through and through, working class people, but they're tough and rough as guts, and they're not interested in all this inner city latte sipping, blue-haired mumbo jumbo. And there is a cohort of these Labor people who go from Labor to One Nation. And you have seats, I know more about them in Queensland, but seats like Oxley and Blair, who are very winnable by Labor. I think they're both currently held by Labor. But One Nation gives them a scare. The Liberals never give them a scare in those seats, but One Nation gives them a scare. Yeah. So there is a path for One Nation to basically take over the Nats and the regional Liberals, and then take over the outer suburban Labor seats. And that starts to make it a very interesting electoral map. Although, look, we're still a long way from that, right? So this speculation is very hypothetical. The issue at the moment is just, can they sustain and maintain a lead over the Liberal Party? And now that the Liberal Party and the Nats have split up their coalition, and people are angry at the Liberals for this legislation, it's put One Nation in a very good position to consolidate themselves as basically, functionally, the opposition party in the country. We'll see if that will sustain, right? So I make no predictions about what comes next. So what's your take on all this?
Well, I mean, I'm starting to wonder if there is this civil war on the right, if the right of politics is lacking. It doesn't know. There's not as a consistent a message or as consistent a belief anymore as there is on the left. So I think there are a lot that Labor and the Greens supporters or their troops agree on. But with the right, you've got this fracturing, because you've got people like Andrew Bragg and Susan Lee and I think Jane Hume, who are more of the cosmopolitan. I won't use a sort of derogatory inner city latte sipping, because I'm sort of probably one of those people, right? So I'm not going to use that. But you know what I mean? There's that sort of wing, but then that's in contrast to the sort of One Nation national wing that's of the right that's moving toward national conservatism, I'd say. So there's this national conservative movement where they're rejecting that neoliberal cosmopolitanism that we had, that we saw as defining the Liberal Party for a long time. And I think that's just not as popular as it once was, and we're having this big fracturing on the right. But there's still going to be a market for that. But I think the Liberal Party as a brand is so toxic now that this provides. I mean, what could happen is that the Liberal Party, as we know it, could be over, and someone like Allegra Spender and the Teals can move in to sort of hoover up a lot of those the cosmopolitan, metropolitan Liberal Party voters, the doctors' wives, so to speak. And so you've got them, and then you've got One Nation and the Nationals, and those two groups they're not really going to get on. There's going to be this ongoing civil war on the right for a long time, and we could be in a situation like that Menzies and his success has benefited from in the 23 years from 1949 when Labor was divided because of the Democratic Labor Party, because of the split in the Labor Party. I mean, this could ensure Labor ascendancy for another decade or so.
Yeah, so that split you're talking about, like between, they say, the Natcons and the Teals, the Liberals splitting into those two different groups. Who knows what the parties are called, but that's been discussed in quite some depth by Damien Curry in his show, The Other Side. If anyone watches that piece of alternative news, which you should, it's a good show.
Good show.
He's described that as it's the current combination. Howard used to call it a big tent, which could sustain the wets and the dries, as they used to call it back in the 80s. And he's made the case that these two groups now, they're being held together for historical reasons, but they don't make sense anymore. It's like mixing water and milk. It's mixing, I don't know what the other things are that you can't mix. But he's made the case that instead of having a Liberal and National Party split up again, what you need to do is split it up as get the moderate wet Nats and the moderate wet Libs and put them off in some sort of Teal party, and get the more conservative Liberals and conservative Nats and have them in a conservative party. And that would make more sense as a way to split up the parties. Now, there is some sense to what he's saying. I mean, we've got a bit of sort of hysteresis here where we're stuck. We've got a path dependency. We don't know how to get from here to there. We're kind of stuck in this path. We've got the vehicles that we have, the political vehicles. So I'm not sure how you'd get there. But the other thing that always occurs to me when I hear Damien talk about that is, if there was a Natcon party and a Teal party, I find it very hard to believe the Teal party would ever support the Natcon party to form government. Yeah. It seems to me that the analogy you draw with the DLP is more apt. I suspect the Teals would feel much more comfortable backing a future Labor government. So they would bleed some of these former Liberal votes into a Teal party, and then, like, playing the reverse role of the DLP, take those votes and then use them to support a future Labor government, which is going to be very tricky for the Liberals. Now, the counterpoint to that a little bit is I suspect the Teals are already close to their high water mark. I don't know if there's too many more seats they can take. I think the people who think like that are already peeling off the Liberal Party to a large degree. And I'm not sure there are that many Teals out in suburban, rural and regional areas. So I think that may have already happened to some degree. And then the other part of this story that I think is worth mentioning is, and maybe we should bring Graham Haycroft on here at some stage to talk about this, because he often talks about this issue that the base of the Liberal and National Party is still very much a set of conservative people. If you let them do the pre-selections and set the policies, you would still get policies that would attract support from the average conservative voter. The sort of people who are drifting to One Nation, many people who think like that still make up the base of the Liberal and National Party, but increasingly the leadership of the Liberal and National Party are living in a different bubble to those people. And they would make the case, to give them credit, I'm going to try and steelman the argument of the boffins inside the Liberals. They would say, well, we've got compulsory voting. In federal elections, we've got compulsory preferential voting. You have to vote for someone. So the One Nation types and the minor parties will eventually come home to vote for the Liberals over Labor anyway. Elections in Australia are won in the centre. Who gets those wishy-washy centrists, those marginal voters? And so they make the case that they don't have to appeal to their conservative base because the conservative base has nowhere else to go. We have compulsory voting. And so what they need to do is appeal to those centrists. And so that's why they make the case that even though the Liberal Party is made up of conservatives, the smart Liberal will just take those voters for granted and spend their time focusing on non-conservatives to get them to vote for the Liberal Party and get them over the line, which the internal logic of what they argue makes some sense. I think they're wrong in thinking that the swing voters are centrists. I don't think that's true. I think swing voters have quite heterodox and hard to pin down political philosophies. And so someone like Tony Abbott, who doesn't pitch to the center, or someone like Andrew Hastie, who until recently didn't pitch to the center, could bring over swing voters with just sort of the strength of their sort of passion and charisma and charting out a strong path forward. It doesn't need to be a centrist, wishy-washy path to bring over swing voters. That's what I think the Liberal boffins get wrong. But to their credit, there is some internal logic to what the Liberal boffins say, which is, I suspect, why it is so hard to convince them to change path. What do you make of all that?
Yeah, I guess, median voter theorem, or that median voter theory, is very powerful. But I think you're right. The swing voter is complex. I'd push back on the idea that the Teals have reached a ceiling. I think they could win more seats. I think they could easily win Brisbane, the seat of Brisbane, because there are a lot of people, well, particularly my age, friends of mine, who are sort of they're not ideological, but they want to see competent government. They want to see, they want their issues. They want something done about all the various problems we've got in Australia, and they just see they see someone like, Annika Wells taking all these, first class flights or business class flights to New York, and her family too, and they're outraged by it. So I think they want change, but they saw someone like Peter Dutton as too scary. So they want someone non-ideological. Yeah, it's hard. They're hard to pin down.
I'm not sure I agree with that last part. I don't think it's about looking for the non-ideological centrist wishy-washy. The problem with Dutton, and I think this is probably unfair, I don't know the guy, but from what I know, he is apparently quite a nice guy and a very decent human. So I don't mean to be throwing shade at him when I say this.
I don't mean to either.
My political judgment is he just doesn't come across as likable. I mean, I know it's an unfair thing, but he just kind of does the vibe on TV. And we live in a political environment that's very visual, and he looks like Voldemort. And it's unfair that the world is like that. But that was the difficulty that he was, I think, struggled to overcome from the beginning. I believe there was back at the beginning of TV being introduced to politics. This is anecdote time. Sorry, let's go on a segue. Tell me if you've heard this one before. So I think it was the electoral contest between John F. Kennedy, JFK, and Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
And so eventually JFK was to win that election, become president, and then get shot. But at this time, the first debate they had was radio only. And the overwhelming opinion was that Nixon won easily. And the next debate was televised. And the overwhelming opinion was JFK won easily. And the idea came about that JFK is much easier on the eye. He was a better presenter. He looked better to start with, but he gave a speech more persuasively and charismatically, and that is a skill that matters now in politics. And I think that carries a lot more sway than most political insiders like to admit, because it's kind of a scary indictment on the nature of democracy, that how someone looks and how charismatic they are and interesting they are as a speaker can carry the day a lot more effectively than political nous and sort of policy understanding. And a lot of people don't want to admit that, but I think it's true. I mean, for instance, I think the reason Trump was elected is that he's a stand-up comedian. That you go to his rallies and he gets on stage and he's funny, he's amusing, he's interesting. You find yourself smiling and nodding and laughing, and it doesn't matter too much the exact details of what policy he's outlined. He's just, it's been an amusing experience. And so you walk away happy and smiling. You feel like you're becoming a part of something. And so I think that's what Dutton was lacking, unfortunately. I don't believe the narrative that Dutton lost because he was too ideologically right-wing. Firstly, his policies were not particularly ideologically right-wing in that election. So he took the advice of the mods and tried to tack to the center, which I don't think probably didn't help or hurt. It's not the right part of the story. And so then for the Liberals, who do they have that's charismatic and sort of looks the part? Realistically, I think that's why people keep talking about Hastie.
Yeah.
So although I think he would do better to stick to his guns, though, to have convictions, and stick to your convictions, even if they're occasionally unpopular, and not try to tack to the center. I don't think there's extra votes to be gained. The fact that Abbott won so effectively, he came back so strongly in the 2010 election and then won in 2013. That wasn't because he was a wishy-washy centrist tacking to the center to try and get centrist voters. And that needs to be explained. And then Turnbull lost a lot of votes when he was tacking to the center. So for the Liberal insiders who hold to that sort of median voter theory, those two data points need to be explained.
Well, I think it was Churchill who said that the art of being successful in politics is identifying the issue that the majority of people are worried about. Like, what's the issue that is most on the minds of the voters, and just being, just going after that with all your might. So essentially just tackling that. And Abbott was brilliant at that, because Abbott was able to identify that people at the time were worried about the boats, stop the boats, or stop the tax, no carbon tax. So he found what people were worried about and he went after it. And I think that's what the Liberals need to do. I think they've struggled to do that. They haven't focused enough on the cost of living, or aggressively as they should have, or the housing crisis. Because look, there are a lot of problems in Australia at the moment, and the opposition, it should be easy for them to capitalise on them, but instead they've essentially self-destructed.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of seeing history with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, where we say that Abbott jumped on an issue that was popular. Some of those, the conventional wisdom at the time was they're not popular. Like going against the climate zeitgeist was seen as crazy brave. It was something that the kooky 10% on the right-wing fringe would talk about. And Abbott comes out and says, scrap the tax. And all of the mods and the Liberals and everyone in kind of the bureaucrat academia media set, which is kind of like they're our cultural superiors, our cultural elites, that they understand everything so much better than the normal folk do. Just ask them. They all were aghast and convinced that was crazy. And of course, that is who Abbott associates with. I mean, that's if you're a politician, that's who you're surrounded with: the media, the bureaucracy, the academia, these elites. And so it was unconventional wisdom to oppose that. And Abbott came out and said, yeah, well, this is just a conviction I have. How about I stick to it? And I try to argue my case convincingly. And I think it became that his position was popular. But I don't think it was that obvious before he did it. So this is why I think political courage, is the most important missing ingredient of Australian politics. And that was an act of political courage, right? The same thing with The Voice. Right? I mean, The Voice was 60-40 in favor. And so if you're going to say, let's find something that people agree with and push it, well, then you should push The Voice. But instead, the Liberals pushed the no vote, flipped it to 60-40 against. And then with hindsight, we can say, oh, look, they picked an issue that was popular. Well, the issue only became popular because it was convincingly advocated for by political leaders. So that's a bit of a part of the problem. I think it's more than just finding what's currently popular. You have to do that. It's a very tricky political skill. Find out what would be popular if you advocated for it well. But other people aren't advocating for it now. Because if something's popular, if it's clearly popular, everyone just supports it. Everyone says yes, and there's no point of distinction. So the trick to politics, I've asked this question hypothetically to a lot of my friends in politics. The trick is we've got to find what's going to be popular but isn't yet, that you can be the person to be the voice for and help turn the corner. Yeah. And I don't have the answer to that. I mean, migration could be part of it, the migration question. But we shall see.
I think so, and I think that's what a lot of people were disappointed by. They thought that perhaps the coalition could have run more strongly on that, and because clearly it's at a very high level. And I mean, I don't know if you want to cover those figures now, John.
Yeah, let's do that.
The numbers, they don't seem to be going. Well, if you look at one set of indicators that...
Well, just before you do that, I just want a question for the people listening at home to write in at this point to round out that conversation. Is firstly, is there a future for the Liberal Party? Is the Liberal Party going to be replaced? And if so, with what? And secondly, I guess if your answer is the Liberal Party's dead, I think that's what some people call total liberal death. I'm not sure if you've seen this meme, right? It's being pushed by some around the right-wing Twitter sphere. TLD, total liberal death. If you believe in TLD, then this is a moot point. But if the Liberals may survive, then the question is, who should their next leader be? Should they go to Hastie? Is he tarnished by what's just happened in the last week? Should they go to Angus Taylor, who's kind of like a slightly less charismatic, more boring looking, perhaps more intelligent version of Hastie? Should they go to Tim Wilson? He's tacked back to the moderates, the only person to win an inner city seat. He's another leadership contender. I imagine a lot of Conservatives would feel uncomfortable siding with Tim Wilson, but love him or hate him, he's a very smart man, and he can't be ruled out. And even if you're going to disagree with him, he's a person who's worthwhile hearing what he has to say. Or is there someone else? I think someone mentioned Jacinta Price, but she's in the Senate. Alex Antic would be great, but he's in the Senate. So please, the question at the end of this is, what's going to happen with this political fallout? Who should lead the Liberal Party? Who should lead the opposition? Will it be, or should it be, a One Nation led right wing after the next election? And then I guess who would lead One Nation in the lower house? Remember, Pauline Hanson is in the Senate. So if you have thoughts on that, please put them in the comments, put them in the chat. Let us know what you think. We might have a review of that. I might put the question on X as well, and we can come back next week and have a look at what the punters are saying about these questions. But with that said, let's segue a little bit onto migration. What have you got for us, Gene?
So I just wanted to bring up those slides again. How do I bring them back onto the stage, John? I can't seem to do that. There it is. Gotcha. Yep. So these new overseas permanent arrivals and departures figures came out from the ABS last week, and they suggest that rather than coming down as the government has been claiming, and as some ABS data, the official net overseas migration figures suggest that it has been coming down. But if you look at this alternative set of data, that would give us an indication that it's going to start going back up again, because this is a chart that Tarek Brooker, for some reason it's come up and, no, that's right, that Tarek Brooker put on Twitter the other day that I thought was very good, which shows that in November last year, we had the highest net number of permanent and long-term arrivals for November ever. Now, November is usually a quiet month relative to others because people come over at the start of the year to do their courses. But we've got, quite high November figures relative to previous years, and that would be suggestive of a pickup in net overseas migration. Now, as Tarek notes on his chart, this is not the same as net overseas migration measured by the ABS. There's some technical reason why this is not necessarily exactly the same, because and this has become controversial because Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business has been using this series and saying, hey, this is an indication that net overseas migration is going to start picking up again, and what the government's been telling us that it's coming down is not right. And so we really do need to have another look at these visa categories. So that's showing that, in terms of net overseas, so permanent arrivals, less permanent departures, it's going back up towards 500,000 a year. So it's very concerning. So that's something I think we need to keep an eye on in the coming months. Migration is not going to go away as an issue. It's going to remain politically salient just because it is having such a large impact on the housing market and straining our infrastructure. Okay, so I thought I should just throw that in there, John, because you wanted to have a chat about migration, if I remember.
Yes, I was looking through the numbers recently, and as happens every time I look through it, I'm struck by all of the different types of numbers being reported, of which I hadn't actually, in what I was doing, included the number you were talking about there, which seems like it's similar to the net overseas migration, except that it's only for people who intend to stay long-term and become permanent in the country. I think that's the difference. Right. But it occurred to me that if I get bamboozled by some of these different measures, it may be the case that others do too sometimes. And then it occurred to me that this matters because depending on what you think the problem is with migration, depends on which numbers we should be looking at and what sort of solutions we should be considering. So like they do report this, the total number of people who land in Australia every year. That is reported, and the total number of people who fly out. And you can get those quite easily on the ABS website, abs.gov.au. It's not overly relevant because, of course, as we'd all know, we have tourists, right? Australians leave to go on holiday overseas. Foreigners come to Australia on holiday. And very few people involved in the migration debate are talking about how we shouldn't allow Australians to go on holidays or we shouldn't allow tourists to visit Australia. So given that that's not really where the debate's at, we'll put that one aside. So the next one, the one that occupies a lot of people's thinking, is the net overseas migration, which is basically everyone coming in or going out in a year except for tourists, right? So this is including people who are coming here on temporary visas, on permanent visas, and citizens coming and going, including, and this often makes it difficult to do the numbers, Kiwis. And Kiwis can just come and go from Australia as they please. They're effectively honorary Australians or permanent residents of Australia by virtue of being Kiwis. And we are in New Zealand as well, in case there's Australians listening and decide you just want to go and pretend to be a LARP as a Kiwi for a few years. You're able to do that quite legally and easily.
But there's not a big flow the other way, is there? I mean, there's a big flow from New Zealand to here. There's not much of a flow from here to New Zealand, is there?
Yeah, well, the net flow is, here. Yeah. The net flow is very much towards Australia. So every year on average, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like every year on average, about 5,000 Australians will leave to stop living in Australia, and about 25,000 Kiwis will move from New Zealand to Australia. So the Australians and Kiwis moving around the world adds about 20,000 a year to our population each year. But that actually involves former Australians moving out and Kiwis moving in. But that isn't a big part of the number. That explains about 20,000, which also, by the way, just that alone can show you some of the difficulties in unpacking the migration issue. I don't know what people think about that fact that Kiwis and Australians can move freely back and forth between the two countries. But unless you're against that, you can't really get net overseas migration down to zero very easily without having an active deportation policy, which I know some people agree with that as well. But once you've deported all of the non-citizens, then what, right? So that just keep in the back of your mind that net overseas migration starts at about 20,000 automatically just because of the Kiwis. But so let's go back. So the net overseas migration, or NOM, let's just shorten it to NOM. This is the number you often see in the media. This is the number when people say that Labor has brought in a couple of million people in the last few years, in the last, I think, 4 or 5 years. That was the NOM they're talking about. And it was tracking for a while. It historically, for the last couple of decades, it was tracking at about 200,000 a year. Just give you some context. So 200,000 a year, 200,000 a year. Then it went to zero during COVID. And then after COVID, it bounced back up to 500. And the defenders of that are saying, oh, look, it's not really 500 a year. We're just sort of making up for lost ground. They never explain actually why we need to make up for lost ground. Couldn't we just have a year off and go back to normal? But, that's what they argue. We're making up for lost ground. But even if that is a justifiable reason, we were at 200, went to zero, went to 500, coming down, but it's still not back at 200. It's still not back actually even near 200. For the last year, we've got for records, which is 24-25 financial year, it was 306,000. So that's below 500, and that's what Labor says. There's always an element of truth in a lot of this political spin you hear from both parties. Right? And so critics of Labor say that the NOM is running far too high, and I'd say true, right? Or especially if you think that the historical average is reasonable or maybe even too high. If 200 is the benchmark that we're looking at things from, then 306 is quite a bit higher than that. And Labor says, oh, no, but it's come down. Yeah, they're saying it's come down from that 500,000 a year mark that we had post-COVID. So anyway, 306. Now, that might be the right number to look at, but I mean, that includes various things. That includes Australian citizens who are living overseas coming back to Australia. So it's probably very few people are trying to prevent that from happening, but that's part of the story. It includes people who have been granted permanent residency and then are flying to Australia to take up their permanent residency. And it includes a lot of people coming in under temporary residency visas. The biggest one being, of course, the student visas, the ever controversial student visas. So anyway, that's one number, and it does matter. But when I was looking at this number, a question that I kept thinking was, all right, that's how many new people put foot on Australia. But some of those come as temporary visas, and some of them go home again. So if we're talking about how migrants change the nature of Australia, if they come for a year or two and go home, they're not the migrants who are changing the nature of Australia or have long-term impact on the housing or long-term congestion. So how many new permanent residents do we get each year? And the answer to that from the same year is permanent residency went up by 205, so about 200,000 in the same year. So 300,000 new people put foot on our shore with a non-tourist visa, and 200,000 people became permanent residents. And then that's also not the same thing as citizenship. So there's the other question: how many people become citizens each year? And in the same year, we're talking 24-25, it was 165,000. So then it occurred to me as I was looking at that, the number of new citizens, the number of new permanent residents, and the number of new people that are just literally existing in Australia right now. Which one do we care about? Which one matters? And as I thought that, I thought, well, it very much depends what you think the issue is with migration. And so it's perhaps worthwhile some people unpacking that, because I have a bit of a heterodox view on this. It's a view I've held for quite a while, and I don't think it'll be popular with anyone. My concern with migrants has always been that they could come here and take welfare, they could come here and cause trouble, and they could come here and just vote the country into a very different country. But people who come to fill skills shortages, I think, are potentially value adding. To me, then, there is a scope for, the issue is maybe there isn't a reason to be giving these people citizenship. I mean, I'm toying with this idea, not that anyone's going to be taking my advice on immigration policy, but how about the idea of we just have a pause on issuing new citizenships? I'd also do a pause on issuing new permanent residencies. I mean, that way people could still get into Australia. They get into Australia if they have a good reason. We let them here. If their reason goes away, then they go away. If they cause any trouble, if they cause any discord, if they commit many crimes, you can kick them out very easily. They're on a temporary visa. So I'm toying with this idea that maybe the issue isn't the nom that we need to worry about. Maybe it's okay if people set foot in this country, but if they set foot in this country with a temporary visa, once they're not useful to us anymore, they're gone. They're easy to remove when we need to. They're easy to remove if they cause trouble. And they're not going to be getting the welfare. They're not going to be getting a vote. So this is coming at this issue with what I think the problem is. Perhaps the number that matters is getting down the level of new citizens and level of new PRs. But I think other people come at this with a different concern. So whatever your concern is may dictate which of these numbers you care about. But I think it is worthwhile coming to this and asking, what is it about immigration that you are worried about? Well, I'll ask that to you then, G. I mean, do you have concerns about our migration numbers? And if so, yes, what is the concern?
Well, I think it's multidimensional. I think it's become an issue post-COVID because it was just too many too soon. And, say 10 years ago, I guess there were some people who were concerned about it, but not to the level we've seen post-COVID, because it just had such a huge impact on the housing market, those big increases in rents and property prices. And, there's arguments about impacts on wages. It could keep real wages down. There's congestion. I think that's a big part of it. There's also, it's multidimensional. It's social harmony. We've clearly seen those issues. We talked about that last week, particularly the Opera House protest after all that demonstration on October 7. Just ghastly, right? I mean, it's just horrible. So we've clearly got those issues too. What I would say, John, is your proposal, I mean, that could actually reduce the net overseas migration. I see those visas and the total as linked, because the temporary migration to a significant extent is being driven by the prospect of people getting PR, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean,
this
a
is
lot
the
of people
value
understand.
proposition. Yeah. This is why the unis are attracting so many people because, oh, hey, you come study here, you'll get PR and you'll get generous, you'll get our public healthcare system, our welfare benefits eventually. That's what's
There are certain
attracting.
tracks of temporary visas, which are kind of known as you stick on these temporary visas long enough, it sets you on a path to a permanent visa, a permanent residency. And so, yes, that's one of the consequences of this would be the people who are coming in under a temporary visa would be coming in only because they actually want that temporary visa, not because they're using it as a stepping stone to something else. If they were only using it as a stepping stone, then they just wouldn't come. So that's true. But what my system does is it does leave open the possibility if Australian universities are actually selling quality education that's sufficiently good that foreigners want to buy it, not as a backdoor immigration scam, but as actually buying our education, it leaves open the possibility of them coming in. They've got 2-3 years. And at the end of that, you are guaranteed out of the country. There is no way to extend it. You are here to buy an education. Your time is up. You're going home. Now, some people just won't come because of that. But if our university is selling great education, some people might. And we'll be able to just sell education instead of selling backdoor visa scams.
Yeah. Yeah,
You were saying before.
Look at CQ, look at Central Queensland. That's seen as one of those unis that is, it's mainly just selling a path to citizenship or work rights. It's selling temporary work rights because they have a high ratio or a high proportion of people who enroll and then have dropped out within 6 months or a year. So look, yeah, there's all sorts of rorting going on, and I think that's one of the reasons people are upset about it.
Yeah. You mentioned before a bunch of the issues that people are worried about, sort of multifaceted concerns. Again, I'm going to say something that I know is only going to get me in trouble, right? So it's not going to be popular with anyone. I don't really buy the economic argument against immigration. Now, I have become much more hawkish on immigration, but my reason is more about the social cohesion, the issue. That you bring in migrants at a sufficiently slow rate, they come in, they integrate, they assimilate, and I think that's fine and can add value, and we all know migrants. You bring them in too quickly, and you can have a swamping of a culture with another culture that fundamentally changes the nature of the country. And if you're going to fundamentally change the nature of a country, you should at least ask the current people in the country if they want that. So that's my concern. I share that concern with a lot of people, though I find mostly the discussion in Australia is wrapped up in the economic arguments. And I'm very sympathetic to the housing argument. But I want to put this on. We're both economists, for those who just tuned in, so you'll have to excuse us. Occasionally, we switch into explaining politics with economics. But new people coming into the country is pushing the demand out. If supply was sufficiently elastic, that shouldn't actually be changing the prices. It shouldn't be changing the quality and experience. It should just be, more provided at the same price. Now, that is the situation in markets that are sufficiently competitive. So one issue here is we should just have the markets be more competitive. Now, not all markets are competitive, and this is my big problem. Not all of them have elastic supply curves. The problem with the housing market is that the housing supply curve is too inelastic. And my bugbear with this debate, even amongst people I agree with, they're all talking about, well, how do I just shift that supply curve, one notch out? I think the discussion shouldn't be how to switch the supply curve one notch out. How should we get the supply curve to just be flatter, to be more elastic? And I think that isn't about increasing the number of developments that are approved. That is about sort of getting rid of, or at least significantly scaling down the approval process entirely. Like if that would change the elasticity of the supply curve. Approving more today would shift the curve out. Getting rid of the approval process, at least on the edge of cities, would change that supply curve. But anyway, that's a bit of economic jargon. But my point is, housing, the issue there is you've got an inelastic supply curve. That is a real issue. And I don't mean to downgrade that. And we should be looking at that and worried about it when we talk about immigration. Most other of the economic issues, I think, are being oversold. We're going back to a bit of a mercantilist mindset. Immigrants put downward pressure on wages. True, but so does trade, and we already have trade. To some degree, movement of people across borders achieves the same sort of price equalization as the movement of goods across borders. So I know our friend Dan Ryan we talked about the National Conservatives before. National Conservatives of Australia exists as an organization. You can check them out if you're curious. And Dan Ryan would argue, yeah, stop the people moving and also stop trade, or significantly scale it back. I'm skeptical of that's going to happen or should happen. But for the moment, just to point out, stopping people moving over the borders won't bring wages up unless you also are stopping trade. And I don't think stopping trade is going to bring wages up either. It's just going to bring some wages up and other wages down more. So I don't actually think it's a true long-term argument that the immigration is causing economic harm other than housing prices. Having said that, that's not a justification for immigration. I am become quite hawkish on immigration because, as I said before, the social cohesion issue, the mass cultural change, without asking anyone if they would like to have mass cultural change, that vexes me. But if the people coming here are on temporary visas that can be withdrawn quite easily, and they're not on a path to permanent residency or citizenship. I mean, they may be on a temporary visa that lasts a long time, but they're not on a path to citizenship, much like what my life was like and would have been like if I'd stayed in Cambodia. I lived in Cambodia for 4 or 5 years. If I'd stayed there for the rest of my life, very unlikely I would have ended up being a citizen. If I'd stayed productive and not committed any crimes, they would have let me stay there for quite a long time. But I would not have been a Cambodian. I would not have been a citizen. And everyone in Cambodia knows that. And no one's offended or accuses them of being racist or evil for noting that that's the way the world works. We could have something similar here where people are capable of staying here for quite a long time. And maybe quite a few people could come. But they take away the assumption that they're going to be getting the PR and the citizenship. I think it might change the nature of the way they interact with the Australian society. And it would change the nature of the sort of people who wanted to come in the first place. At least that is my hope. Any thoughts on that, Gene?
Well, I think it'll reduce the numbers. I'm trying to understand your hypothesis of how it's going to change the nature of people. What's your hypothesis there?
If you're if I visit your house as a guest, I act like a guest. If I visit your house and then I am convinced that it's actually my house, I start telling you where to put the dishes. I don't know if that's stretching. That people here as guests, explicitly as guests on potentially renewable temporary visas, I think it is less likely that they will start marching down the street demanding that that everything has to be done their way or else this country is horrible. Like when I was living in Cambodia, it never occurred to me and my expat friends to march down the street demanding that the Cambodian government, accusing the Cambodian government of being anti-Australian and sort of make sure you fix things for the Australian community here. It wouldn't have occurred to us to act like that. And I don't think that's what the Pakistanis living in the United Arab Emirates or the Indians living in Qatar, I don't think that's how they behave either. But I think we've got a slightly different attitude when we tell people that you tick a few boxes, you stay here for 6 years and you're more Australian than us, or you're just as Australian as us. I don't know if that's the right message we want to be sending. And I don't know if that encourages assimilation. Yeah, like maybe we want a path that over 20 years, I had penciled in the idea that you stay here for 20 years and you spend 10 years in the military and you can become a citizen. I kind of borrowed that one from Starship Troopers though. If you do the military service, you get to be a citizen. And if you are a parent of a child whose other parent is Australian, then you can become a permanent resident. So that way we're kind of saying you stay here long enough and you invest enough to defend our country or create new Australians, then you're becoming one of us. But otherwise, perhaps we shouldn't be assuming that people become one of us just because they've stayed here long enough.
Yeah, interesting idea, John. Look, I'd just say we probably need a two-pronged approach. We probably need to restrict the quantity and change do something qualitatively as well, which could be what you're suggesting. I guess they're linked because if you do the qualitative things, you're probably going to have an impact on the quantitative. I think if you make it harder to get PR and citizenship, then you're necessarily, what you'll see a big hit to the student visas because we'll be a less attractive destination for people to come to. They'd probably rather go somewhere else. Yeah.
By the way, I looked into, we discussed this before, the fact, why don't the major parties just crack down on migrants? And we discussed briefly, I raised the prospect that in my opinion, the reason is that the government relies on student visa holders paying full fees to universities as their way of holding up the university system. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, I do. I think that's valid, but I mean the simpler explanation is simply that doesn't a quarter of the population, or may even be 30% now, have at least one parent born overseas?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's evidence that people who are currently citizens of this country have a strong vested interest in seeing just a bunch of more student migrants. I mean, if anything, I've seen some evidence that suggests new citizens are more anti-immigration than old citizens. There's very much a mentality of get in and shut the door behind you. So I don't know if that's... I think it would be overwhelmingly popular to decrease the number of student visas in this country, except for the fact that the decrease in revenue to universities would require either us to increase the fees that Australians paid or start scaling back some of what universities can offer. Or increasing government funding, which, as we've discussed before, the government just can't afford. They're already in deficit. They got very few prospects of increasing revenue, and they got lots of other cost drivers.
Yeah.
So they just don't have the money. So they look at that and think the government thinks, well, I can't afford to put any more in universities. If I make Australian students pay more for university, they won't vote for me, because I think people would change their vote on that issue. So if we just bring in hundreds of thousands of foreign students to pay full fees, that can pay for 30% of our entire university system. And that is roughly the numbers, right? Up to 40% in some cases at some universities, but average, I think, about 27 or 30% of university costs are covered by foreign students. And I think that the Liberal and Labor politicians just haven't worked out a way to square that circle, right? And until they do work out a solution to that, I think they're going to be scared to address the student visa problem. And as I've said before, my solution is just let some universities fail. I don't think universities are a net positive in our country anymore. But that is not something that I am currently able to sell onto the Liberal or Labor parties. Perhaps I should give One Nation a call.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, John. I mean, we'll have to wrap up soon, but I think, are they at their current scale of activities? Yeah, I think if we scale them back, we could actually get some gains. So I think overall they're probably beneficial, but they can be more beneficial if we scale them back significantly. Yes. No, interest. I'll have to think more about that. That's an interesting idea.
Anyway, so for the people listening at home, we asked before what you think about the future of the Liberal Party and One Nation. What is your concern with migration? Send us, if you're watching on the YouTubes or Facebook where you can do the comments easily, let us know in the comments. What is the concern with migration, and therefore what part of migrations need to be addressed? Because it is a big bundle. I mean, I understand the instinct to just say, stop migration. But which part of migration is vexing you? Which part of the migration is worrying you? Is it the cultural change? Is it the number of people, the number of new citizens that are now steadily, seemingly demographically shifting the demographic balance with the people who've been here for a long time? Is it just you don't like students? Is it the Kiwis? Is it those 20,000 bloody Kiwis sneaking into our country every year? I suspect not many people have a problem with the Kiwis. I hope not. That's how I got in the country. But let us know. I'd be curious to know, not just I'm sick of immigration. I'd be curious to know, what is it about the immigration question that is vexing people? Is it the housing issue? I think that would be, for a lot of people, that makes a lot of sense. Is it that and here you disagree with me, but that's okay. You're allowed to. Is it that you believe that it is making Australia poorer? I'd be very curious to know what it is that's motivating people, because framing the right solution on migration depends very much on accurately identifying the nature of the problem first. And I'm not sure that has been fully done as of yet. So that's about all I've got to say on that issue. We did have a backup issue, but I think we're already out of time. So we'll have to come back to that another time. And I think we've taken up the full hour and a half. I've been putting up comments as we go. So I think we can skip the idea of going back through them and addressing them. Any final thoughts, Gene?
No, John, we really had a good talk about immigration, and also the RBA. I thought that was good. I'd like to come back to what we think the RBA is doing or how it ought to act. So you make a good point that its operating framework is essentially Keynesian or new Keynesian in a way, where it has some notion of a Phillips curve, and it's looking at unemployment. It's paying a lot of attention to that as well as inflation. And I think the point you make about just being careful to understand what's driving unemployment, to what extent is it demand or supply side factors, I think that's a good one. So I think we can explore that a bit more in the context of what it means for what the RBA does.
Well, especially once we get the next inflation stats. So we should, I'm sure once the next inflation stats come out, I'm sure that'll be in your roundup, and
yes,
we'll have a chance to get our teeth into that again. So thank you very much, Gene. As always, thank you to everyone listening at home. This has been Death and Taxes podcast with Gene and John. This is hosted by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. That is taxpayers.org.au. Please go and check it out. Find us. You can find Gene and myself and the Australian Taxpayers Alliance on all of the, well, not on all the social medias. I don't do TikTok or Instagram, but on X, on YouTube, on Facebook. And Gene, I believe, is big into LinkedIn. So go and find us there. Give us a like, give us a follow. Please share this around. And we do this on Thursdays at 7:30 Queensland time, Australian Eastern Standard Time, 8:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, which is you, Sydney and Melbourne people. So we do this Thursday, 8:30 Sydney time. So I hope to see you again next week. And until then, stay free.